And we're already recording because someone else had that added in. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and move this to speaker view. And if everyone can mute their mics, and we're going to just have the session open right now to myself, Tim, and Jan, the presenters, so that we can go ahead and move it. Parker, can you move to a muted mic, please? I see that you're coming up as with your mic on. Okay, thank you. Okay, that did not work. It's okay. So, good morning, everybody. My name's Stacy Ridinger with Cause San Diego. I know several of you here on the call. We have been waiting for a while here to start our first webinar. And today we have two outstanding gentlemen who are going to be sharing some details about the work that they've been doing around the country. And what I want to do now is share a slide that shares some details about who they are. So if everyone can tell me, can you see this slide picture here? It says nonprofit alliances. Do y'all see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So today we are going to be kicking off with nonprofit alliances, coalitions, and mergers, key considerations for fulfilling your mission. We have Tim Davis, the president and managing partner of Glick Davis and Associates, and Jan Glick, partner of Glick Davis and Associates. Now, before we get started, I'm going to turn this slide off and get to their slides where they'll be sharing. I want to tell you why they're here today. There's two reasons. Number one, we have over 13 or 14,000 nonprofits here in the San Diego region. And in order for them to get their work done, very few of them work in isolation. They really do need to work in partnership with each other. But more importantly, do they all need to exist? Is there a better way where they could potentially merge and or work together in some more combined way? So I've been researching this a bit. And so what happened for me one day, I got home, I had just talked to somebody about more and more nonprofits struggling and trying to make ends meet. I think it was around some of the bigger announcements about funding changes. And I asked ChatGPT, I said, ChatGPT, I want to see a video. Just teach me about what nonprofit mergers and acquisitions are about. Because, for me, I had had an MBA, I studied it, and I didn't learn anything about nonprofits being involved in these. So I said, ChatGPT, I just want to learn about it. And the very first hit came up with a webinar with Jan Glick being interviewed on, I think it was was it the nonprofit show? Was
Yes.
that it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
on the nonprofit show. So, as a multitasker as I am, I was in the middle of changing to go to a different event. I was listening and watching, and by the end of that video, I wanted to have him today here for all of you. So, without further ado, I want to turn it over to these two gentlemen so that they can get started with their session. We will mostly wait to take questions at the end, but if you have something, you can easily put that in the chat. And we'd love for you to share a little bit about who you are and why you're here today in the chat as we get started. So I'll turn it over to these two. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Stacy. And so Tim and I are going to tag team this, and I have a couple sections. Tim's got a couple sections. But first, let us tell you a little bit about who we are. And so, just what was behind that nonprofit show that Stacy saw. Um, I founded Jan Glick and Associates. Then Tim came on as a partner about 6 years ago. 30 years ago. And in those 30 years, we have consulted, facilitated right about 40 nonprofit partnerships and mergers from all volunteer all the way up to several deals with over $100 million nonprofits. So a lot of experience in this. We have all kinds of statistics on, what percent worked, how did they work, what happened. Um, The other thing that I did, and Stacy and Tim and I were talking before we began with you all coming on, was the number of nonprofits in the U.S. And if you don't know this little statistic, when I began in the early 90s in the nonprofit sector, there were between 1.3 and 1.4 million nonprofits in the U.S. And does anybody know how many there are now? Put it in the chat. Close to 2 million. It's about 1.9 million. So we've seen nothing but increase in nonprofits. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's something that not only has Stacy been looking at, but we've looked at too. And in 2007, 2008, I did a bunch of research and published my book, Nonprofit Turnaround, in 2010. And that was right in the middle of the subprime mortgage bust, the Great Recession. And that was a time when people said, my God, this recession is going to put a lot of nonprofits out of business. And it didn't. And the number of nonprofits has just climbed consistently throughout the dot-com bust of 2000, subprime mortgage bust, and then even through the pandemic. Number of nonprofits keeps going up. And so we've done a lot of work in this field, nonprofits struggling due to economic circumstances, duplication of services. We do a lot of work between executive search, these mergers and partnerships. Everything we do is based on research and data. And for those EDs in the room, like Stacy and others, I've been a nonprofit ED for 13 years of my career. So that's a little bit about me and the company. And Tim?
Thanks, Jan. Excited to be here today and do this alongside Jan. Thanks for letting me tag along, Stacy. And I met Jan 8 years ago through this work. Actually, I was on the for-profit side, so I was your cold-hearted corporate raider for a long time, doing M&A on the corporate side, specifically in healthcare for over 10 years. Met Jan as he was representing a nonprofit that was really struggling, and did my first nonprofit. It was an acquisition in that case, not a merger, but we did a for-profit to nonprofit combination. And now through the years, Jan and I, we've gotten to partner on nonprofit to nonprofit, which is what we're going to focus on today. For-profit buying nonprofit, nonprofits buying for-profits, different entities merging together, three-way deals. So we've gotten to see some interesting, different methodologies and ways about going about this. But it brought me in. So again, I was that corporate raider for a long time. And the first deal Jan and I did was the first deal I'd ever done where one person wasn't making a lot of money at the end. But the terms of the deal were that we created a foundation to fund women's substance abuse treatment in Washington for the next several years. We ensured that all staff of that nonprofit got to retain their jobs. They got to stay on all of their benefits. The executive director was guaranteed a 1-year contract upon the deal. And then all the clients in care got to stay in care, regardless of what their coverage was, who was paying for them, if they were even being paid for, and what happened. And it was a good experience for me. And then over the next 2 years, I transitioned to partnering with Jan. And the very next deal we did was very similar. It was more of a fire sale that was about to go under, but we actually had them stall their closure for 2 extra days so we could get a deal done. And same terms, every client stayed in treatment, every staff member kept their job. The services stayed open to the community, in a situation where they were faced with their only other option was to shut down the next day. They had no cash left to pay staff. They should have closed months prior. And ever since then, this is the work we've been doing. So again, excited to be here and share a little bit more today. And that's what brought me into this unique little sector we're going to talk about.
Well,
Next
thank you,
slide.
gentlemen. I'm excited to hear what y'all have to share here. This is and I hope everyone comes at it from a lens of wherever they are and seeing how this can apply.
Okay, so what we're going to go through here is really 5 major sections of the webinar. So we're going to talk about financial condition of nonprofits the first few minutes, then a bit of an overview of the spectrum of nonprofit alliances, collaborations, mergers. There are some things, and you heard in our introductions here, Tim and I have an interesting relationship because we've seen this world from both sides, from the corporate side, which is mostly Tim's background, and then the sort of pure nonprofit side, and every interaction in between. And there are a number of things that people assume around nonprofit mergers because they've heard about Time Warner AOL, or they've heard about some other big corporate merger. And those are some myths that we'd like to dispel. It works differently when there's no shareholders, there's no stock. It just plain does work differently. So we're going to cover those myths. We're going to give a couple other examples that are not merger examples around coalitions and administrative partnerships. So talk about some of the other non-merger approaches. And I think we'll have a lot of time at the end for Q&A. And on the Q&A, if, like Stacy said, if you have some questions during the the flow of the show, just either pop them in the chat, just pop them in the chat, and then Tim and I will either respond at that time or let you know that we'll cover that later. So with that intro, we're going to jump into the financial health of nonprofits. And this data that we're going to look at now, thanks, Tim. Um, this is 2018 data from a national study. Um, and we've tried to find more current data, and we haven't found anything more recent than 2018. And while the economic stimulus payments, PPP program and other economic stimulus payments from the Biden administration certainly propped up the sector a lot in 2021, 22, 23. Those have been in most cases run down by now. And so we don't think this 2018 data is far off. And over my 35 years in the nonprofit sector, it's got worse and worse and worse. So that middle box, over half the sector has less than a month of financial reserves. Back in the early to mid 90s when I was starting out, that number was 50% had less than 3 months operating reserves. Dramatic change over my adult lifetime. So this is tending to go in one direction only. It just seems to get worse and worse, always having to do more with less. And so that middle box, a lot of nonprofits struggling with how do I find the cash to do this? How do I make payroll? Going to the left box, 1 out of every 12 nonprofits is technically insolvent. 7 or 8% are hanging on by the skin of their teeth, um, trying to meet payroll. And in the right-hand box, when you look at over the longer term, you look at 3, 4, 5 years of 990s, a lot of nonprofits have lost money, multiple years. So if anybody on this screen is in a tough financial situation, you're not alone. This is our sector. It's a sector that struggles financially, and so you don't need to feel guilty about this. If you're the executive director, if you're the development director, it's kind of part and parcel of what we live through. Next slide, Tim. Thanks. Okay, so now that's before the current federal administration, and I think, as you all know, this federal government has been cutting nonprofit money rather dramatically. It's been cutting government funding. We're going to talk about government funding flowing through to the nonprofit sector in a few minutes. But those funding cuts are leading to service cutbacks, jeopardizing mission effectiveness. That's on top of the previous slide, right? The external environment is making it worse. Um, so Stacy's saying, what's the difference between a small business and if I can extend your comment, Stacy, like family-owned business kind of thing, and nonprofits? And the truth is, they are very similar. I owned a business back in the mid '80s, a retail business up here, and so I've worn both those hats. There are a lot of similarities in the kind of bootstrap approach that a small business takes to business that a nonprofit also takes. You don't have the resources or the scale that 1,000 employee company would have, much less 10,000 or more. And then sticking with the funding cuts, if you've been following the news at all, I suspect you have. They're affecting higher ed, they're affecting healthcare. The arts is being really decimated these days. Environmental organizations from the EPA on down. I mean, it's facing every portion of the nonprofit sector. And then the lower right-hand side of this slide, we're going to go into some detail in a minute about, as you turn to try and raise private donor money to fill that government funding cut, it's really hard. And it's almost certainly not going to replace the full amount of government support. Next slide. So you'll get this both in the tape of the presentation and in the PowerPoint that Stacy will send to all of you. So it's a complicated slide, but it's got some very clear and simple messages for all of you. So this is nonprofit quarterly data, which I think, again, as you probably all know, pretty reputable publication, 2020 data. So yeah, it's a complex slide, but there's a few things you want to kind of pull from this before we move on. Um, the federal government funding, that blue circle in the sort of upper left, federal government, 491 billion, it dwarfs the individual and foundation funding in yellow to the right, 265 billion from individuals and 44 billion from foundations. So that's the essential reason I just said it's going to be hard to replace federal funding with private money. Secondly, as you all try and replace federal funding, which may trickle down to state and local funding, with private funding, you're all competing with each other. That everybody's going after the same big donors in your community or your state. So they're under tremendous donor pressure right now and have to make hard choices. Um, and the other thing to notice on this chart is when you take out the hospitals and nursing homes, the lower left, the big green circle, and you take out the higher ed right next to it, and you get to what I call on the right there is more of the quote grassroots nonprofit sector. And even if you take out religious, which is further to the right, these trends I'm talking about are even worse because it's again, it's harder for smaller human service organizations, arts organizations, environmental organizations, harder for them to make it. So I'm just going to pause there. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. All right, next slide, Tim. So just kind of wrapping up this kind of financial overview. So all this obviously limits the ability of nonprofits to sustain your mission, sustain services. And so three kind of quick summary points here. The ability to have some cash, which gives you flexibility, which is the second box, liquidity. Cash means flexibility, liquidity, ability to be nimble and shift programs to on the ground situation currently. Um, I'll get to that in a second, Stacy. Sort of lead you to the third box, which is, can we combine efforts, right? Is there a way to be a little more efficient by combining efforts? And Stacy, I think your question was, is anybody increasing funding? I believe, yeah. Well, I don't have this for a fact, but I don't have data on this, but I do believe that there are a lot of funders who are increasing funding, whether they're going from a 4% rule. And for those of you not familiar with the 4% rule, that's, most foundations give between 4 and 5% of their corpus every year because that keeps the corpus about flat. And so, yeah, there are some funders who are going above that. There are some funders who are digging deep. Yeah, I believe there are some that are increasing. But again, the larger point is true that if the average philanthropy in the United States goes up, say 10% now, that's not going to replace the amount of federal government funding and federal pass-through money that's being lost. But yeah, I think in each of these economic downturns, donors have stepped up. Absolutely. And that is the one lovely thing about nonprofits. People are doing this for the heart, like Tim's career shift. He shifted for the heart, not for the pocketbook. Okay, I think that's the financial. Oh, this is the summary slide. So this is just giving it these percentages um, of what percentage of nonprofits have liquidity issues, are insolvent, are impacted by federal funding cuts, operational reserves. So these are some data points that sort of summarize these first four slides. And I didn't catch what was the chat question that just got popped in.
How should nonprofits navigate these funding cuts while covering operational costs?
Yeah, yeah, and that is essentially the reason we're doing this webinar. That one of the ways we think one of the better ways to deal with this is to achieve scale, is to achieve a greater scale, and that scale gives you better efficiencies. It allows you a little more flexibility. It's not the only way, but we don't control the federal government, right? I mean, the cuts are the cuts. And so a lot of people just want to fundraise their way out of it. And what we're trying to say is that's going to have its limitations. And so another strategy besides fundraising is collaboration. Can we do more with a partner, whether it's through a coalition, through an office administration partnership, through a merger? It is a way of being more efficient. It is a way of addressing the funding cuts. That's, I think, in large part why Stacy pulled this together. And so turning it over to Tim for this next section.
Yeah, and just to start off, does anyone here on the screen, anybody been a part of a nonprofit merger collaboration? Anybody been a staff member at one, a board member of one, seen it, heard it, been involved in it? Stacy, I see a hand
Yeah,
up.
so I'm on the board for Homemade San Diego. We're one of 19 affiliates around the country. And at some point, we were going to sunset Homemade San Diego and have it merge into Homemade Orange County, which was the original Homemade. And there were a lot of discussions. Unfortunately, Homemade Orange County decided it wasn't in their best interest. They didn't have capacity to take it on and to manage something that was distant from where they were. But there, we did a lot of background checks. We looked at the numbers and we're really trying to figure out how we could do it because we only had one nonprofit paid person. And it was so hard for that person to get out of, they were in admin nightmare. They could not, it was admin nightmare and fundraising like fatigue. They could not do, it was like they could barely focus on programming. So that's what we were trying to save.
And
And
that's
I will say that two of those 40 deals that we've done as a firm, two of those deals were like Stacy's, right? Where we were putting together two organizations that had previously separated, and 10 or 20 years later, they wanted to come back together.
all right. Anybody else? That's a good answer.
And you can, if you have had some negative experience with a corporate merger, just stick it in the chat.
We tend to get a lot of those people that have had a little bit of a negative experience when two groups went to merge together, and happy to talk about it. And so this slide is really about why do organizations start having this conversation, and the four main reasons, kind of up on the slide. Far and away, the number one is to preserve the mission, right? It's to keep the services going. It's to keep delivering an impact. Either they're facing closure, they're facing shutdown of certain services because they have to pare back, or they've just gotten so burdened with the fundraising, the operations, the administration that their impact is just being diminished year after year. And that's the concern, right? As all these 2 million nonprofits stay alive and none of them close, are they actually delivering an impact after a while? Or are they just trying to stay alive? Which one are they actually focusing on? And as funders, which I think we have a few on the call, that's what they're trying to figure out, right? Who's going to go out there, put the money to use to make a big impact versus who's just using it to scrape by and make it for another year. And we want to deliver impact. That's what most everybody in this sector really wants to do. So far and away, that's the number one reason that groups come and talk to us. And so, as we look through it, and you can see, this is again expanding on those reasons. The mission preservation, staying alive, we've seen it play out in numerous ways. I used two examples at the start, both healthcare related, right? These were centers that were going to shut down within weeks. No one would be there. We did one for youth housing. Again, it had about 80 staff. It had about 30 kids. This is long-term youth housing. Nowhere for them to go, but out of funds. And the government wasn't stepping in anymore. No one was going to do it. We found a partner for them. Every kid got to stay there. And they didn't even have the money to plan the wind down. If they had shut down, where were they going to get those? Where were they going to send the kids? Like, how were they going to get them dispersed to safe homes for all of those? And we were able to make that happen. All of them stayed. All of them were receiving other services as well. And they were able to keep most of those going as well. But every kid stayed in their spot in their bed, which was, priority number one. We're talking when foundations and others reach out to us, right now, the arts, like Jan talked about, right? They're all hitting the same funders. They're all calling the same foundations. They're all asking the same big names in their communities to support the arts, especially in smaller towns. We're talking Midwest here. If they merge together, are the funders more likely to support them? If they centralize those back office functions, if they go as one big ask rather than 18 small asks, do they have a little bit of a better opportunity? We believe they do in a lot of cases. And that's, again, what we're here talking about today. We've also seen it play out where the community has stepped in and tried to help drive this. Some domestic violence shelters that I'm referencing where they were going to close. There was no money left, and the community realized they absolutely needed that service, right? No matter what, whether it was under that entity's name or a different one, that service was the only one in the community. It was the only domestic violence shelter for women there was. So the community stepped in and drove some of these efforts and discussions to make it happen. So again, walking through those reasons, we've seen various people come to us to start those conversations, but all with that same goal of we need this mission, we need this impact, we need it to stay alive, whether it's for the benefit of the community, for the clients that are in there right now. And we hope we can help. Jan, you can always jump in too if you got anything. So, and these, again, just diving in, and we're going to talk about collaborations a little bit later on. These have taken several different shapes. On the collaborations, we have a lot of conversations that happen. You all probably heard some about back-end sharing, resource support sharing. Can we share IT? Can we share financial oversight? Can we share HR back-end costs? We've heard a lot of conversations recently about data management and data solutions because nonprofits aren't equipped a lot of times to deal with massive amounts of data and data collection that they might need. Thanks, Stacy. I think fiscally sponsored programs are a good option for some nonprofits that no longer want to handle the 501c3 responsibilities. Ooh, there's a lot to that question. Jan, do you have
I'm sorry. I just put it in for later, not for now. Keep going.
Sorry. I can, let me know, Stacy, when you want me to respond to that, because we have a lot of experience with fiscal agencies. So.
I think maybe near the end. I just threw it in there as a question for later.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, here, the funding diversification has been another big reason that we've had groups approach us. Sometimes we have a grant funded agency, maybe we have a more earned revenue funded agency. They're trying to move the grant funded agency, maybe trying to be a little bit less dependent, maybe on federal grants, maybe move into the earned income spaces. And we see them looking to merge with somebody that's kind of figured that out already. It may not be an in-house knowledge that they have. And they also don't have the extra capacity to build out whole new service lines or whole new, kind of viable sides to their organization. So the funding diversification has been a big one as well. And again, as I mentioned, approaching funders, we had 3 different educational groups that were based in 3 different states as a different one. And when they came together to have these talks, they found out they were all approaching the same banks, but each group had a development director and each group had a development team supporting that director, but they were approaching all the banks in that region with the same asks, the same forms, going for the same grants, asking for the same totals. And they merged together and made it one development director with one team. And instead of just tripling the ask, like adding them all up, they started asking for 5, 6, 7 times as much because they were a much bigger organization now and they could speak to the larger impact. And the banks were willing to talk to them. And they work with a lot of bank, financial lending institutions for their donations and corporate sponsorships, but worked out really well for them in the long run. And we've seen other examples play out there too. I'll pause for a minute. Any comments, questions? No?
I will. So, speaking of this, have you seen success with joint grants where different organizations they put in a grant together? I've had people approach us even with Cause San Diego to do so. We didn't move ahead yet, but is that something that you see that's worthwhile? And if so, maybe we can talk later about how to do so as partners.
I'll go first and then Jan, I'll let Jan, because I know Jan's got some good ones. We've been working with several joint grant recipients. Sorry, I hear my voice echoing back. It can work.
Hey there, can I ask you a question? I purchased online.
Amy, I think you're not muted.
I'm
Sorry.
so
It's all right. Um, sorry, Stacey. A lot of those joint grants, they're meant to maybe some shared services or some shared administrative oversight and stuff for them, at least on the ones we're working on right now. When there's good relationships and good tracking, good leadership, they work really well. When there's a leadership void at one of the organizations, or maybe one organization isn't good about tracking what they're doing or managing their team, it's a nightmare to unfold because you have a lot of issues that crop up from the one side that caused it, where they didn't track their people, they didn't track their time, they didn't record their impact for it. And you've got the other one trying to carry the stick. And now both are now in a bad place with a funder when it puts them in a bad light. But Jen, please step in. Yeah.
And this current question from Parker sort of gets at this same issue that Tim's getting at. A lot of this is about people, right? And are people high performers, not high performers? Are they sort of self-centered or overly focused on their organization, less on the community? So there's some overlap on that question. So yeah, Tim's right. And we have a slide later on that is a kind of a take a bit of a timeout pause because we don't want to give the impression that partnerships or collaborations or coalitions or mergers are a panacea, right? They don't solve every problem. And they don't solve the problems of if somebody's not performing, if somebody's not doing their job. Like they don't solve those problems. So Tim's exactly right to differentiate those where it works from where it doesn't work and why. But just to kind of go to the basic question that Stacy asked, joint grants are a smart idea. I've used them personally in my 13 years as a nonprofit ED, and it is a lovely first step. If if you have a potential partner that does similar work or complementary work, um, funders love it. Funders, I can't speak for every funder, but we've worked with a lot of funders. And I would say the vast, vast majority, you get a lot of bonus points in the scoring as they're evaluating grant requests. You get a lot of bonus points for coming in as a twosome or threesome or a coalition. It's seen very positively, but Tim's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, if you have to deal with somebody, another organization that you think you trust, they think they trust you, you think you like their staff, they think they like your staff. That's where it's got the highest probability of working.
Yeah, and Parker, you bring up a good question about the ego issue and especially the EDs, right? They're the ones most likely to use their job. If two groups are merging together, you're probably only going to have one ED. And I will say at the front end of these discussions, these initial discussions for nonprofit mergers look a lot different than for profit. One of the main reasons is the upfront conversation takes longer, and it's more about the people than it is about how much money or what evaluation might be. It's about what are the roles going to be, what's the integration going to look like, and sitting those two EDs down a lot of times and saying, okay, who is going to take a slightly different role, who is going to maybe take a little bit of title change, and in most cases they're able to come to something that the other ED feels good about. On the flip side, a lot of the groups that approach us are approaching us because they maybe lost an ED recently. They realize they're in a tough financial place or they're in a changing world environment, and the board is faced with two options. One, do they go replace that ED, get someone they don't know what they're going to do, coming into a situation they may not be familiar with, or do they look to partner with somebody that seems to already have it figured out and maybe be a more safe decision about putting the hands of the organization into those that have already doing it well, rather than placing it into the hands of one person that they're out searching for in the world. Stacy.
Tim, I just wanted to say in the Chronicle of Philanthropy a few months ago, I read a great article and it talked about co-directing. So we see co-CEOs. So that also, I just wanted to share it. They were exposing that, which was a little new in my mind. I have not seen that very often, but I'm wondering, have you ever seen the co-executive director role happen in the nonprofit side?
We actually
I think
have
I've seen a couple.
Yeah, we should have linked it at the end of this presentation. We've linked one of our white papers on nonprofit mergers for everybody at the end, but we actually have a white paper on co-directorships in nonprofits right now. And it's something we've seen a big trend and shift towards in there. Jen mentioned at the start, we do CEO and ED placements for nonprofits. And that's been more of a focus. A lot of groups have asked that question. Can we do a co-directorship? What does it look like? What makes it successful? I see Jan's hand waving. So Jen, please jump in.
What makes it successful, right? And it's exactly the same thing we just said. What that white paper says is that if those co-directors have worked together in the past, if they have a track record of working together, they like working together, and so it's like a marriage of love via an arranged marriage, right? If you just put two people together because they're both strong and the board thinks it might be a good fit, the odds on that working are a lot lower. But if a development director and a finance director, or a program director and a finance director, whatever, if two folks who have worked together side by side for some period of time and the ED is about to retire and they choose to work together, the odds on that working are much higher. And we've done a couple of those searches as well. So the people side of this, for Parker's question, for all the things we're talking about, the people side of this absolutely is what drives success or not. And a lot of times we can't even get to like second base on a deal if one of the two EDs doesn't agree early on to whatever the case may be, take a lower position, retire if they were planning to, change careers anyway. That ego issue, Parker, is you're spot on. It's very much the top of the list in terms of go or no go for these deals.
And when we do our first kind of intro calls with the board chairs and the EDs of both organizations, that's what we're focused on. Are we going to have these discussions about putting the impact of these two organizations, how to maximize it, how it might grow and expand and be more impactful for the future? Or is it going to be a little bit about we're protecting salaries and roles because, that's not going to get us far down the road. And if it's just about protecting those because we're running out of money, then you already know someone's probably not going to make it through. So Parker, thank you for the question. So, all right.
Yeah, I just put the response to your latest chat. Stacy back in the chat, mostly ED, but we've seen some board chairs have egos too.
No one here on this call is familiar with that. That's a new concept, Jan. So, but yeah. All right, and then just talking through other alliances and collaborative efforts. We just touched on several different examples there, but staff overall always comes in pretty nervous, always worried about what the shakeup is going to be. We've found, and Jan's about to touch on this in our next section, it impacts staff a lot less than they think. And so we generally get a pretty positive outlook on at least the ones we're participating in on staff. It is the EDs, the board chairs, those where a lot of the frustration and the stress plays out over time and causes time and delay in these types of deals to happen. So before I move on, just a few of the realities, and we just mentioned this, right? Like we do truly believe these work. We've seen it work. We've seen it work with funders. We've seen it work with organizational viability. We've seen it work with better org structures, able to deliver more services, able to deliver better services, across the spectrum, better quality to whoever you're trying to impact. So we truly do believe this works. It is not a panacea. If your organization is performing poorly, your staff isn't all marching in the same direction, you don't have the greatest reputation, you're not delivering great, like it doesn't cure a lot of those things. It doesn't cure everything, but we do think it can help with a lot, especially on the viability side. So yes, we think it's worth the work, and it does take a lot of communication and people work, as Jan was saying. It takes a lot of upfront discussion, a lot of planning, and a lot of aligning people, getting them all aligned behind what that mission impact is going to look like as a combined entity. So I had a funder explain it very well one day that sometimes in nonprofits we get a little too hung up that the right-handed bowling association is unwilling to partner with the left-handed bowling association, that they're too fundamentally different. But if they can put their issues aside and realize that they all want to be the best bowling association, it works pretty well. And if we can get through some of those things in our head that we think define us as unique or too different or unable to operate together, we can see a lot of success. You ready, Jen?
Yep. Yeah. So we'll go into there three or four things that are concepts that I mentioned earlier that flow out of the corporate merger and acquisition arena that people think the same things apply to the nonprofit sector. And some do and some don't. And we kind of covered this in the earlier chat, so I think we can kind of move on. But yeah, if you have had any experience with any nonprofit mergers, just say something in the chat and we might respond to that. But in the meantime, here are the four sort of myths and misconceptions that we hear a lot about. Top left, job loss, right? And so tremendous job loss in the corporate M&A world, much, much less in nonprofits. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Top right, financial motivations. Um, in the corporate world, what drives mergers is shareholder price. That if two corporations, who are beholden to the shareholders, that is what drives the corporate world, is shareholder value. It's Wall Street. And we don't have shareholders in the nonprofit sector. We don't have stock. Very different motivation. We'll get to that in a minute. And going down, bottom right, this is the big one that everybody, when they hear the word merger, they think I'm going to lose my job. We're going to debunk that in a minute. You're probably not going to lose your job. Almost certainly not if you're a frontline program delivery or service delivery worker, possibly on the administrative side, but we'll get to that in a second. And last but not least, nonprofit mergers are about preserving community services. They're not about making somebody money. And it's just fundamentally a different world. And we've actually seen, I've been in a boardroom for several meetings with two large nonprofits up in Portland, Oregon, a few years ago. It was right when the beginning of the pandemic hit. And one of the board members, this was in Health and Human Services, one of the board members was a corporate M&A guy. And he could not get it through his head that there were no shareholders. He could not get it through his head that somebody was not getting rich off this deal, no matter how many times I tried to explain it. And yeah, this is all about maintaining services, important services to the community. So that's the top motivation there. Uh, we've kind of covered number two. And, back to the people side of the equation, one of the reasons we do see these work, and I'll give you an example of, I don't want to say every nonprofit employee, every nonprofit board member is a perfect human being. I mean, nonprofit sector has got like 20 million employees in the US and probably 20 million more board members. But most people, when we get into these boardrooms, are there for the right reasons. They're there for the community. They're there to do good for their community, for others. And so we see, like, we might recommend that nonprofit A have 4 board seats and nonprofit B have 7 board seats. And because nonprofit B is a stronger nonprofit, they have a bigger balance sheet, they have more employees, so they deserve more board seats. We've seen over and over again the large one be generous and offer an extra board seat or two beyond our recommendations. So that's an example of collaborative intentions that we do see a fair amount of that in nonprofit consolidations. So digging into these 4 myths in a little more detail, I think we've covered the top left, service delivery focus. So going to top right, there are kind of 2 ways to structure a deal. So one way to structure a deal is that you have 2 organizations. This is basically Tim's bowling example, right? That the left-handed bowlers and right-handed bowlers, they're doing the same thing. Why are we separate? We can accomplish more together. Um, and so, but the other way is that, and I'll take another sports example, pickleball and tennis, right? This may be the wrong example, right? But they both need courts. They both run membership lists. They both have a certain structure about how they're going to acquire members. They both have PR functions, and so maybe that's the wrong example, but if you take something similar, like in the arts arena, uh, you have an opera and a ballet and a philharmonic. Um, there may be opportunities there because they all need development functions, administrative functions, HR functions, IT functions. So you can have complementary services merge as well. It doesn't have to be the exact same service. You can have two, the example Tim gave about um, the educational nonprofit. That was three different organizations serving different geographical arenas. So you don't have to be, exactly providing the same thing. There are ways you can add to the other partners' service offerings. You can do the same thing in different areas. You can do similar things locally. Um, Going on to the bottom here to A and C, this is really the big one. That what you hear about in the blogs, um, in whatever's left of the papers, are mass layoffs, and those are corporate deals. Um, and this is the big thing that we found that uh, something like 65-70% of these 40 deals that we've done have had zero job loss, right? Because say they had two finance directors, the organization can find another role for the finance director, so something else that wasn't being done before that adds value in the new model because you don't need two finance directors. So sometimes a new role can be found for the person. In almost every case, frontline staff are retained because we need more service to the community, not less. So the place where we see some job loss occasionally is you don't need two CEOs. And so a lot of these deals that are successful are deals where there was an interim executive director, right? So they were going to be there only a year anyway, and they start pursuing an acquisition. So they were going to lose that position anyway. That's a great opportunity when you have an interim in place. When you have a retirement coming up, if it's a smart board, we've had three or four contracts where we were hired to evaluate, should we do an executive search for a CEO or should we get acquired? And so we do the analysis, and more times than not, we do recommend the merger because it's more predictable than just hiring somebody after two interviews and five reference checks. So we occasionally see a little bit of loss. The most common one is in the CEO position. Uh, Going on down from that are the administrative positions, finance, IT. But sticking with that theme a little more, one of the problems with nonprofits is that we tend to be very small. So whether it's the 1.3 million nonprofits from 30 years ago or the 1.9 million today, who knows the average size of a nonprofit in the United States? Anybody want to put in the chat the average budget of a US nonprofit? Just somebody stick a number in the chat.
Stacy's going.
There's a lot under 50K. Uh, so the number that I've been using for years that I've seen is pretty consistent is a little higher, but a half million, But the point is that's tiny. Whether it's 50K, 100K, or half million, you're talking about either zero staff or maybe at a half million, maybe you have five staff, right? So the benefit of scale is that if you have 10 staff versus five, now maybe you have a finance director and a half-time bookkeeper, so the quality of financial reporting you can do is much higher. That's what happens a lot in these deals is that there can be a higher caliber of service delivered to the community. Um, and so we just have not seen much job loss. Um, and we've been doing this for 25 years. Um, so yeah, that's the biggest myth
I
in
wanted to say
nonprofit.
something real quick, Jan.
Yeah.
So you just sparked a really interesting kind of thought for me here. And these are some things that we're going to take into some other things for cause with some of our other sessions and cause conference and things like that. But it makes me think about how some nonprofits have been around for a while and there's changes that have happened in technology and the way we do business. But some people still lean on some of those previously held kind of processes and procedures. And it'd be interesting to kind of know what is the most optimal biz model for a nonprofit starting today. And from there, helping these organizations that are struggling to go, okay, this is where you need to be and this is where you are, right? And helping them to see that. I wonder if that's anything that you all have that you could share back with us later, if you know of that, because I think that assessment could be helpful for them to see how far away they are from being competitive in the space.
Well, I have a generic comment, Tim, you can add to this, and I do want to respond to the ExxonMobil question, but the generic comment is um, nonprofits are extraordinarily slow to act and extraordinarily slow to react. Um, if some folks on this webinar are personally an entrepreneur, whether you're a nonprofit entrepreneur, you're a for-profit entrepreneur, if you like looking at data and looking at market conditions and needs and making decisions and making a play, nonprofits are terrible at that, right? Because everything is a long, drawn out staff discussion, board staff discussion. We have a human service organization up here in King County, Washington, just north of Seattle, that was approached 3 or 4 times over the last 25 years to merge. And the answer was always no, 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 we're fine, we're fine, we're fine. 25 years ago, they had 75 staff. They're down to 7 now, right? Now, do you think the ego got in the way there? You think? And do you think they, were looking at data like realistically? They just did the same old, and they just shrunk, shrunk, shrunk. Never like you see that in nonprofits. So it's a generic answer, Stacy. It's not a specific answer, but it's one of the reasons that Tim and I do this work, and we're trying to get nonprofits to kind of read the data better, understand what the external environment's telling you, understand what capacity do you really have with 3 staff or with 5 staff or with 7 staff. Um, to go on to your ExxonMobil question, that kind of branding is pretty common. And so if it would only work when you have 2 relatively equal size partners, so Exxon and Mobil were both big behemoths. And so if you have 2 similar size nonprofits, they might do the same kind of thing on a 3-year or 5-year term. So we'll be the Acme Jones nonprofit from 2026 through 2029. And then in 2029 will become the Acme nonprofit. So it's often a transitional brand. How much it up? Oh, mine too. Double your impression. Oh, is there more? All right. So the last section, collaboration strategies, we're just going to do, I think, maybe 4 more slides. And this one, we're trying to say there's a continuum of collaboration options from left to right. So left is very little, a small amount. So exchanging information. The joint grant application would be what I would call the green circle, coordinating, right? It's one project only, and you're altering your activities to achieve the common purpose defined in the grant, right? So that's a great example of coordinating. And as you get more and more detailed, we're cooperating. We're sharing, more of our staff in the yellow and the red, and then finally the orange is the full-blown merger. So the point of this slide is that there's an infinite number of collaboration possibilities. One of the things that Tim and I both like about our work is we like what's called structuring the deal, because we structure the deal according to the 2 missions, the 2 sets of programs, the 2 sets of people. There's a different structure for each different situation. It's not like a cookie cutter approach. And this slide kind of speaks to that. And so we do an assessment, we speak to the board members, we speak to the staff members, and try and figure out what's the right level of collaboration, the right structure of collaboration for your situation. Next slide. So we're going to give one example of a back-end administrative collaboration and one example of a coalition, which would be the community collaboration. Next slide. So we've had a lot of experience facilitating coalitions, being members of coalitions. And if you're familiar with, European governments like the UK Parliament, and you might hear the word coalition government in places that are not the US. Um, Coalitions often refer to temporary arrangements that I'm referring to that in a sort of political sense. But in the top left box, benefits of a larger voice, players get together. Coalitions usually refers to more than two. It's usually a fairly large number, 10, 20. Um, but you might be collaborating in Sacramento, right? Over funding for your community. I mean, that's really what associations are. If folks on the screen are, if you're nonprofits or member of an arts association or a human service association, that's arguably a coalition as well. You're coming together for budget gains or public policy advances. Um, Top right, if we struck the word legislator and put in funder, Stacy, right? And that top right could say funders will listen to multi-party proposals more readily than single-party proposals. That same concept works for both policy and for funding. Um, in coalitions, if you're working together on sort of a simple administrative arrangement, right? You're not merging, you're not making any permanent changes. There's still typically some kind of shared staffing. There's got to be some administration of our messaging, our positions, how do we collaborate? There's still some commitment to how do we fund this thing? How do we administer this thing? And last but not least, if you're looking at a coalition development, this is maybe the hardest one, that broader is better. You're not forming in perpetuity. You're coming together to achieve a specific goal. So even if you have players who might not have the same position on the issue, but they might be close or be the same on this issue, but be differing on a different issue, um, broader is better. There is an element of collaboration called coalition building that can be helpful to achieve mission and program goals.
And Jan, I would let you know that there are a lot of alliances and coalitions here in the San Diego region. That is something that we have seen more of, as not say, I can't say more of, that I've seen quite a bit of. And it might even just be where we cross promote each other's events or we support each other in some way with helping to do in kind type of services and support to each other. So those things are happening. So this is really interesting to see and put a name on it, right? Because we just kind of have that thing, hey, and all of a sudden you find a couple of these groups. Cause has it where you have a couple of groups where it really turns into a nice, strong working relationship, and before you know it, we are truly providing impact for each other.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Stacy.
Yeah, and I guess, I'll take the last one. Back office consolidations, kind of our last example here, and on our most frequent one that gets discussed. Coming from the healthcare sector, you see this on the for-profit and not-for-profit side across the board. If you've seen management service agreements, management service contracts, shared service agreements, most hospitals, including nonprofit ones, if you really break down how they're operating, they have these for every wing on their hospital, for every different type of service specialty, so that they can consolidate as much of the back end administrative function as they can. We've seen it recently. We helped some groups, and actually an example down there, the Dayton Performing Arts Alliance brought together the opera, the ballet, the philharmonic. So in an area in a small town in the Midwest, right, where arts are just getting crushed across the board, their three largest ones came together for shared services model. Financially now they're in a great spot. They're all using the same building. They're all using the same social media promotion platforms and teams. They're all using the same ticket sourcing. They're all using the same website builders. They're all using the same data management team. So they were really able to consolidate all of this back end type of functionality and actually got more and more efficient out of it, which was impressive as well. So, you know, again, a good example in the arts. You see this in the healthcare industry all the time. Right now, there's a group of YWs that one hired a CFO for the first time and financially turned them around in 6 months. So now three others have said, well, we want to use the CFO. Now it can get a little complicated in terms of which CEO does that CFO report to, and how do they get to make decisions, and which organization do they best make those for. But there's a lot of real world cases where this is a good benefit to the different organizations and gets them a higher level of strategic thinking, a higher level of operational efficiency. And again, more time and more effort on the impact and the mission. That's what we're all going for here.
Tim, Maurice had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it, Maurice.
No, no, no worries. No, this is fascinating, and it really is one of the areas that we've been looking at. I'm with the in addition to my organization, National Veterans Transition Services. I'm also a member of the San Diego Veterans Coalition, which is sort of an association of about 160 veteran service organizations. And one of the things that we've been noticing, in addition to the funding, is that let me just kind of take a step back. We have a name that we've been called, um, given to us by one of our retired admirals, Mike Mullins. He called us the Sea of Goodwill, and that the Sea of Goodwill, as it relates to organizations that are seeking to serve veterans, grew from 25,000 to 40,000 and up to 60,000. And so we got to a point where it became so inefficient, where everything that you said here really was resonated with me. Everybody was vying for the same customer, for the same dollar, for the same everything, where it became totally unsustainable. And then the one byproduct that most folks didn't see coming was what we call customer fatigue, where because there were too many choices and too many inefficiencies, and everybody's saying, pick me, it really caused the customer that we were trying to serve to basically shut down. So now here we are at this particular point, needing to scale down. And so my question is, how do you do that? How do begin the discussion without stepping on toes, insulting anyone? I mean, it's such a delicate situation. I don't even know where to start. Over. I'm going to stop right there.
Tim, you want me to
Go
take
first,
that?
Jan. Yeah,
Yeah,
please. That was
yeah.
awesome, Maurice. Yeah.
Um, so I don't know your situation, Maurice, exactly like that. Feel free to call me later this week or drop me an email. But you know, my book, Nonprofit Turnaround, has a bunch of strategies um, that you could look at. Like, I'm not sure from your question if it's a turnaround, if it's strictly a downsize due to funding cuts, how much duplication there is. There's got to be an assessment first. And every project we do an assessment, which involves like reading a lot of documents, reading all your documents, talking to the board members and the senior staff and trying to figure out what the right intervention is. And then back to the people side, when you're talking about turnarounds, mergers, restructures, downsizing, some of that's got to be done, with leadership. It's hard to have an all hands on deck exercise that's 100% open and transparent if somebody's going to lose their job
Mm-hmm.
because people don't want to lose their jobs. Nobody wants to let anybody go. So this whole issue of how open and transparent a restructure, a turnaround, a merger can be, again, we don't have a one size fits all. We've done deals that are 100% open and transparent. Everybody knew what was going on. We've also done many, many more deals where the board knows about it and the executive leadership knows about it, but nobody else does. So that's a few general comments, Maurice, but it's really, I think, a longer discussion based on your exact situation. And yeah, just feel free to reach out to Tim.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's who does it? Who's crazy enough to even attempt it? Because again, you're going to get eaten alive.
Yeah.
But it's necessary because we can't sustain things at this level. It really places funders in awkward positions, if you will. And again, the research that I've done so far is that in the realm of veteran service organizations, just here in San Diego, I've identified 456. And so talking about, tripping all over each other, it's insane. But to your point, it's a matter of efficiency. Do we need that many? Who's operating at the most efficient level, and who could engage in or would engage in a merger or an acquisition, and which one should consume the other? I mean, these are some of the present day issues that at the Veterans Coalition we struggle with this all the time. And so I really appreciate Stacy you pulling this together, and gentlemen, I really appreciate you and Jan and Tim, your expertise in just coming to the table to share with us. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I'll say one more thing, Maurice, because when you said the word 456, it makes me want to say one more thing, which is that um, what what we could follow up more on the phone or over email would be if you could find some low-hanging fruit. What I mean by that is if you found two or three organizations that were willing to take the first step, just two or three who the executive directors know each other, they work well together, there's some track record of working together. Um, Taking the first step is often the hardest. Um, and so, not trying to bite off all 456, but trying to create like a successful model with the first one is one of many, many strategies, but to be continued. So yeah, we're at the Q&A time. We have about 15, 18 minutes left. So the floor is open. I think you'll get this PowerPoint from Stacy. We have a 15, 20-page white paper. We did 26 mergers, acquisitions, consolidations between uh, the Great Recession of 2008 and the pandemic. And now we've done another five or seven since the pandemic. So, but the paper was called 26 Nonprofit Consolidations. That's available on our website. But uh, you
Yeah,
know,
so do y'all all have any questions for them that might not have been answered? I do want to let you know we are considering hosting a longer, maybe 2 to 3 hour longer workshop next year with Jan and Tim and possibly some local experts as well from the region to dig into this, where we could even maybe talk about these assessments that need to happen, or how do you approach these larger coalitions and see if they want to take the next step to something further, or even just teaching more about how to build alliances and coalitions and what does that mean and how does it help your organization. So, any questions before we finish?
yeah, there's a couple in the chat. And Stacy, if you want to drop the screen share and so we can see each other face to face, I think that'd be nice
Okay, let's
for the
go
last
ahead.
15 minutes.
Yep, there we go.
So James, how do you start a conversation with other nonprofits about the possibility of a merger? Very carefully. First impressions are so important. So, James, if you want to, can you take James off mute so he can add a little more color to his question?
Yeah, hi. I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation. I mean, I think we talk a lot about how many nonprofits there are in the region, and how we are often, playing in the same sandboxes. And, our work we often do in collaboration with other, partners. We do grants together. We do, initiatives that have multiple partners in them. But again, for the sake of that efficiency and shared fundraising, I think it's at least worth considering. And so I just wonder, like with partners that we work closely with, we have these relationships, if it's, a possibility to take that next step, how does that conversation get started?
The most common, uh, I would say by far, is the two EDs or CEOs know each other. And I can maybe hear that in your voice. I'm not sure, James, if that's your situation or not. But if the two EDs know each other and they've been, in meetings for years and years together, then that's a fairly straightforward thing for one to approach the other and say, hey, we've been working together for X number of years, and would you be willing to entertain, a more in-depth discussion about how we could collaborate more closely? And the first thing the other person might say is, well, what do you mean? Do you mean merge or, blah, blah, blah? And the correct answer to that is, I'm not sure. Don't cut to the M word immediately, but just that tactful first step. And like Maurice's question, like each of these has a much longer dialogue required about how to set this up. So, for example, in what I just said, if you're the ED, you don't want to get too far out in front of your board. So you can't even do that first step unless you know your board is not going to shoot you down, right? So there's just a lot of preparation that goes into it, but it's something that we've done a lot in these 40 deals. Some of the times we've been the one, they wanted us to make that call instead of the executive director. Most of the time it's the ED. But I hope that helps a little bit. Just some thoughts about how to get it doing. But when I started out by saying, very carefully, what I mean in general is just there's a lot of thought and planning before that first conversation.
I have a question
Um,
for does anybody else have Olivia?
Olivia,
Is that
Olivia
a
has
question
one.
or a thumbs up?
What
I
considerations
put a
should?
question in, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. What's your question, Olivia?
Um, so in contrasting for-profit mergers versus nonprofit, obviously there's not the financial motivation as it is in for-profit, as you pointed out in your presentation. So what should boards really be considering then, if they're even considering whether a merger is an appropriate strategy for their nonprofit?
You want to take that, Tim?
Yeah, I'll go a little oversimplified and then we can go further if we want. But oversimplifying it sometimes, we sit down with these boards and the EDs and we're doing a lot of strategic planning, right? What do you want to do? What are the three big things you want to accomplish? And you're always getting immediately with nonprofits, what are your limitations, right? What do you have the financial to go after it? Do you have the team to go do this? Do you have the ability and extra time and capacity to go do it? And so if you've identified what you want to do, what your big strategic priorities are, maybe it's 1, 2, 3, what those impacts are and what the strategy is, and you have some hiccups and some roadblocks, and you know of other agencies that have already figured it out, that's one big one right there. Like, go have that conversation, even if you're just going to go learn about what they did to get by it, but it may evolve into the merge around it. 2, if you're strategizing and you're spending more time in that board strategy session around, are we going to remain viable? Or are we planning to just, how do we stay alive versus how do we deliver an impact? You're probably already past the point you need to start having these discussions. And I know that's oversimplifying it a little bit too much, but if you really are sitting there in those board meetings and that's priority one, quarter after quarter, year after year of, hey, how do we just make it through next year? You're missing the mark. You guys want to go make an impact. You guys want to go have a mission that you're charging forward on. You probably need to go look at some of these alternatives, at least from our point of view.
Thanks.
Okay, so I asked a question earlier. This is Stacy about the different. Okay, so when we're talking about the continuum here, so Cause San Diego is a fiscally sponsored program. We are not a 501c3. We fall under one. And my question to the two of you, or one of you, is when should a fiscally sponsored program be an alternative for a nonprofit to downgrade versus them doing a merger? And I will also let you know that United Charitable, which is our fiscal sponsor, they have over 150, and they have had an influx of nonprofits coming to them looking to downgrade to fiscally sponsored programs. So please speak to that.
Yeah. Um, I would describe fiscal agency as a tactic and not a strategy. And just to say some things that perhaps you already know, Stacy, and folks on the phone might on the screen might know already. Fiscal agency is generally for small nonprofits, right? So one all volunteer, one staff, two staff. When you start to get closer to 10 staff, there's, you're starting to approach $1 million, over $1 million. And I don't want to make this too cut and dry, but there's a certain scale at which the fiscal agent won't want to keep you anymore because they're typically there for smaller organizations in their early stages, startup years, subsequent years. So the first distinction I'm trying to make here is the cost of fiscal agency, right, which I would say ranges, sort of between 7% and 15% of budget, depending on what the package is that you're getting from the parent entity. Um, that's not necessarily much different than what it would cost you to hire the staff or hire the consultants to do it without the fiscal agents. So it's typically not a financially driven strategy. It's more like a tactic of how do we deal with being small, right? And because it's so much harder to find high caliber part-time employees, so if you're growing from two staff to three, that's a huge leap. That's like a 33% or 50%, like I'm not sure on the math, size of growth. And it's much harder to find a half-time person or a quarter-time person, but that's where fiscal agency comes in. It doesn't require you to get a full-time IT person, a full-time finance, a full-time HR. The fiscal sponsor can do it. So yeah, I'm trying to differentiate a strategy for survival from a tactic of how you deal with being small in your early startup years. And so if the question then becomes, we're never going to get much bigger, then I would argue that the question just becomes, can we keep fiscal agency forever if it works?
And I'll add one, and I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit here. A lot of the organizations we work with, a fiscal agency is sometimes very strict on what the money is for and what you do with it and how you operate, right? And as a nonprofit, we see it, especially in the grants community, right? Like they become so narrowed down in their focus of managing the grants that they feel like they've lost the mission. We were just working with like an HIV provider, right? And they want to provide wraparound HIV services to everyone in their community. Well, they feel like from their grants, they have to just manage kitchen expenses for making meals with those HIV and manage a kitchen because that's what their grants covered for the longest time then. So every time they try to branch out, they get pulled back to managing a kitchen operation. And so it goes back to Jan's point. If you're looking to scale, if you're looking to deliver on a mission versus if you're looking to manage towards one specific thing that is tied to that, there's a little bit of a difference there. Most of the nonprofits we're working with, again, hedging, are trying to figure out how to be less restrictive in what they're doing. And they're trying to open up and deliver a little bit broader scope rather than more prescriptive, which sometimes we see with the fiscal management. So nothing against them though, because they do work great in some situations. So.
Stephen from Bank of California, you have any questions for the group? I know you just dropped in and you didn't get the whole slide. We'll get to the slides later. Any questions or comments from you?
No, I was just trying to catch the end of it. I just had some overlap in appointments. I always appreciate all the work you do and bringing this information to all of us. I'm just trying to drop in. I watch a lot of this too. Director of nonprofit banking and lending at Bank of California, and I do have these discussions. Just over the last 20 minutes that I've been listening to of kind of where are we, and I do sit in on some board meetings and have some strategic conversations and on their strategic plan. At what point do we turn that into a business plan and is it feasible and can we move forward? So a lot of these conversations you're having, are all over the place. And as a banker, I speak to 20, 30, 40 organizations, a month. I'm like, oh, well, you're kind of doing the same thing. So I work, and that's why I support you so much, Stacy. You kind of bring all these organizations together. Wait, no, they were just doing that. They're bringing it together. So I appreciate the insight, and obviously, I'd like to see the deck and learn more from Jan and Tim. And thanks for having it. If I can offer any resources or any information, I'm happy to answer anything as well.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Well, we're at 12:55. I know we are all probably lots of things, emails we have to go back to and phone calls and meetings, but this was s- this was amazing. This was everything that we were envisioning from Cause San Diego's perspective. We actually tried to get Jan to maybe Tim to come out to the Cause conference. I think we got in touch with them a little bit too late. But we'll be sharing back the slides after this. If you all have any questions for them, share their contact information if you don't have it already. But if you have any other questions, please comments, please share those over the next couple minutes.
And Stacy, before we do, thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting us. It's a pleasure. So thank you. And good luck at the conference too.
Yeah, Nancy, I see you up. Did you want to say anything? I know she's coming from National University and she's really big into uplifting and sustaining our nonprofit community. I think you're on mute.
Yes, I'm involved in about probably 10 different nonprofits. And over the years, I've been with some that have really struggled and some that have merged or at least merged back office services and things. And I know I joined you late, but I think this is a really important topic. I think financially, there's a lot of organizations that are going to have to think outside the box and be open to, looking at new opportunities to leverage their strengths, but also align with appropriate partners. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing the full presentation since I missed the beginning. Appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy.
All right, so if that is it, we are going to finish up. I just wanted to remind everyone, October 9th is the Cause Conference, and we have about 100 more tickets to sell. We want to sell out like we usually do, so please go to our website to learn more. The full agenda's there now for you to check out. And we obviously still have sponsorships available, and I think we have one exhibitor space left. So please get with me or others on the Cause team for that. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope this was useful to all of you and your questions and everything else that you shared. I just think that we need to come together and find those, like Nancy said, we need to think differently in order to sustain ourselves and always think about your mission first. It's about that mission and what you're trying to what you're trying to do. It's not about it's not about a business making a profit. It's about a business making an impact. So ensure that, to me, my last comment would be if you're sitting there looking at your organization and you feel like either a board member or otherwise, and you're just fundraising for a paycheck instead of an impact, that's a clear question you need to have because you should not be doing a nonprofit if it's just to pay someone's income and not actually doing something for the services of those that you're trying to support. So that's the biggest thing. I see a little bit of that, and it hurts my heart to know that because I know that the people running those organizations don't want to be that way. So always think of this as an option. So anything else, Jan or Tim, to share before we close?
No, thank you, Stacy, and thanks everyone for attending. Great session and our pleasure to be involved.
Thank you all so much. Yeah.
All right. Y'all have a great day. Take care.
Take care.